Hi, this is Bill, aka MommySB, and for my first video blog tutorial I'm going to show you how to incorporate external audio effect units into Ableton Live 7. Being able to use external audio effects as well as external instruments, just as you would use plug-in effects and soft synths, is a new feature introduced in version 7 of Ableton Live. A friend had recently asked me how to do this, so I thought it would be a great topic to kick off a, hopefully, ongoing series of video blogs dealing with audio production. Here's what you'll need in order to use external effects with Live. First, quite obviously, you'll need Ableton Live 7. External effects and instrument capabilities are new features that were introduced in Live 7, so any previous version can't do this. You'll also need a multi-channel audio interface with at least 4 ins and outs. So you can't do this with any built-in audio interfaces like would be found on a laptop, not that you generally would ever want to do that anyway. I personally use a Focusrite Sapphire 10 I/O, which has 8 analog ins and outs. Lastly, you need an external audio effect unit. This could be a dedicated effects processor, like say a Lexicon Reverb, or it could be a multi-effect unit. For this tutorial, I'll be using a Korg KP2 Chaos Pad. So let's take a look at the basic setup and the cable routing that you need. This could differ slightly on your particular setup, but the principles should remain the same. Here we see the audio interface in the middle. The inputs and outputs are labeled by the boxes. First, outputs 1 and 2 are routed to the studio monitors. This is pointed out because outputs 1 and 2 are very special since they are what are called the main outputs. You'll see the significance of this in a moment. Now let's connect to the external effect unit. We'll be sending the signal to the effect units from output 5 and 6, and then we will send the process signal back into the system through inputs 3 and 4. This creates what is known as an effects loop, and you might ask, why not use inputs 5 and 6 since you're using outputs 5 and 6? The reason being is because that would create a feedback loop, which is never a good thing. This is also why we need to avoid outputs 1 and 2 being part of the effects loop. In order for you to hear the process signal, it needs to pass through the monitors. If you feed the process signal back to itself, again, you have a feedback loop. So now let's look at the monitoring situation. But first, let's look at a few important terms and concepts about monitoring. Hardware monitoring is a signal received by the input of an audio interface and is passed directly to the output or the headphones. This is controlled by the audio interface's mixer. This is generally a software utility that typically looks like a mixer console, and we'll take a closer look at that in a moment. The benefit is there's virtually no latency. The reason this is because the incoming signal is passed straight to the outputs by the hardware itself. It doesn't pass through the computer. The drawback is that if you have any added software-based effects, you won't be able to hear them until you record the signal and then play it back, so this is not real time. Software monitoring is a signal that comes through the audio interface input, is sent to the digital audio workstation software you're working with, like Ableton Live, is processed and then is sent back to the outputs. This is controlled by settings within the DAW software. The benefit is that you hear the final result of the signal pretty much immediately. I say pretty much because the drawback of software monitoring is latency. For a signal to enter the interface, be sent to the DAW, and then processed and sent back to the audio outputs takes a small bit of time, which on paper may not seem like much, usually on the order of only 5 to 20 milliseconds. That small bit of time can make a huge difference when trying to play in time. Depending on the speed of your system and in using a quality audio interface, this can usually be mitigated. But you still need to consider it. It's also an important bit of info for this topic. Now let's take a look at the audio interface mixer. This one happens to be for my Sapphire, but all audio interfaces come with something equivalent. The top part, seen here, controls the hardware monitoring levels of the inputs. The right side, over here, controls the output channel configurations and levels. First, let's see the output configurations. 1 and 2 are going to the studio monitors, and depending on your particular audio interface, you may have dedicated outputs for headphones. The only reason I bring this up is because with the Sapphire, there are actually 2 headphones out that are actually doubled off of outputs 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, seen here and here. Now let's see the effects unit setup. outputs 5 and 6 are actually going to go to the chaos pad, and the signal from the chaos pad is going to go back into the system through inputs 3 and 4. Notice that the faders for inputs 3 and 4 are all the way down. The reason for this is to turn off hardware monitoring. In this case, I want to be able to hear the end result of the channel should I add any extra software effects. If you leave both hardware and software monitoring on, you will get two versions of the same signal played at the same time that are slightly out of time with one another, and this is because of a latency that is introduced in the software monitoring. Also notice how the output channels are configured. 3 and 4 are echoing their inputs, which is indicated here and here. You'll see that the other setting is 1 and 2. 1 and 2 basically means that these outputs would be echoing what the main output is sending out. 7 and 8, since it is feeding to a headphone, is actually echoing what the main output is sending, so it's set to 1 and 2. So let's take a quick look at the steps involved. We'll go over these in detail during the actual tutorial with Ableton Live. So you want to be able to route audio from a live track to an external effects processor. First, you need to activate the send and return sections. 2, you need to drag the external audio effect device to the effects section for the return track. 3, you need to set the audio 2 of the return track to the outputs connected to your external effects. Set the audio from to the inputs that it sends to. 4, you need to create an audio track to record the process signal. This is called the wet track. Set the audio 2 on the return track to go to the wet track. Turn up the send A dial on the dry track, and arm the wet track and record. How would this look in Ableton Live? Here's a quick screenshot. First, we see the return channel and see that it has an audio effect unit plug-in added, shown down here. Next, we see that we have a dry channel, indicated here, that has the source audio, and we have a wet channel that will be used to record the affected audio. The dry channel sends the signal to the return channel using the send knob here, and the external audio effect on the return channel, again here, has the proper audio interface channel set. This may seem a little bit backwards at first glance, but the audio 2 means that the channels that are sending to the external gear, so in this case 5 and 6. The audio from is where the effect unit sends its signal to, 3 and 4 in this case. The return channel has its audio 2 settings set to the wet channel. This is so that you can record it. And the wet channel has its monitor mode set to in, meaning that we will hear the result of the channel in real time. If you had it set to auto, you would only hear the channel from the external A while you're in recording mode and not all the time. Now let's try this out on Ableton Live.